Hi everybody. So in this video, I want to talk a little bit about this journal article by Mosby and Galloway, and it's about in Indian residential schools as well. But this one focuses, instead of language, like the last one we talked about, this one focuses on diet. So how residential school diets have had a long-lasting impact in Indigenous communities, and not just for the survivors, but for multiple generations. So the title of this article is Hunger Was Never Absent: How Residential School Diets Shaped Current Patterns of Diabetes Among Indigenous Peoples in Canada. And the article, that's the name of the article. Our journal name here is actually CMAJ, and then the date of publication is 2017, and the page number is just this electronic E number, so 1043 to 1045, and this is 189 is the volume number, and then the DOI information is here. So this is just a title of the section in the journal, but it's not the name of the journal. So you do have to be a little bit careful with this one, how to cite it properly. The info again is here. CMAJ is the journal article or journal name. The publication volume and issue number there, more clearly stated actually there. And then the authors' names aren't listed until the very end of the document. So you'll also need to cite Mosby and Galloway as the authors of this article. So if I was going to cite from this article, I would cite Mosby and Galloway, and then use the page number E1045, whichever page I'm on, or whatever page I'm taking my info from. So in this article, I'll just highlight a couple things, or I have highlighted a couple things, and I'll just introduce them to you. But this one's all about the lack of nutritious foods that were served to the children in the school systems, and the lack of quantity of food, and how hunger and starvation was a prevalent experience and almost universal experience amongst residential school survivors. The article starts with some quotes. I would definitely read the whole thing. There's some really impactful quotes and descriptions of what the school was like by survivors themselves. And for example, in this account, Indian Affairs branch employee Russell Moses, who attended the Mohawk Institute in Brantford, Ontario from 1942 to 1947, described a typical diet where hunger was never absent. Breakfast consisted of, quote, 2 slices of bread with either jam or honey as the dressing, oatmeal with worms, or cornmeal porridge, which was minimal in quantity and appalling in quality. So the worms in the oatmeal tells us that, it was, old, stale, and full of worms, like bugs had gotten into it, and yet they served it anyway. And that's an indication of, how little they really valued the lives of the children, and they didn't really pay attention to the quality of the food. It was a sign that they devalued the children's lives, and they were cutting corners with cost, right? So the government gave very little budget to the schools to feed the children, and oftentimes, as we'll see, the school authorities ate beautiful food, healthy food, nutritious food, and a lot of it where the children were given very little food, and the food that they were given was really poor quality and often stale or rotten. There's other quotes too of children going hungry and then trying to get food, stealing food wherever they could, even if it's from the animals that were on the property. So they had to steal in order to feed themselves, basically, or else they would, be starving. And in addition to just the widespread lack of food and lack of quality of food. There were also nutrition experiments done on Indigenous children, and this is a part of, residential school history that, again, tells us how dehumanized or dehumanizing the treatment of the children was, that they were almost like treated like guinea pigs for these experiments on nutrition that the government was sort of controlling. So again, children being treated worse than animals or like animals, dehumanized in many different ways. And this article, really, it's about the impacts of this diet, the impacts of this lack of nutrition in childhood, and how that has lasting impacts for those children once they become adults. And so we were talking about the long-lasting impacts of lack of nutrition, lack of quality foods in childhood, and how that has lasting consequences for the rest of the life of the survivor. But also, as we'll see, studies have shown that even the second generation and even grandchildren can hold their genetics, can hold on to the impacts of this deficiency much longer. So things, genetically, the impacts of lack of nutrition can have long-lasting effects for over multiple generations of a family. And they talk about the effects here. One of the main ones was height stunting. So that means, you wouldn't grow as tall if you were deficient in nutrition as a child. And it also creates, different changes in your physiological structure, so that when you do have nutrition later in life, when it is available, your body doesn't metabolize it in the same way, and you carry more fat in your body. So it could also lead to obesity later in life when you do have more food available to you. And also the prevalence of type 2 diabetes is related to this height stunting, and also, body fat mass acts or carrying extra weight. And the article also goes on to other risks, reproductive risks for women who were, again, if you were deficient in nutrition as a child and you grow up and you're a woman and you want to have children, there can still be risks or elevated risk for those women in terms of, the size and weight of their babies, and the risk of stillbirth and other things. And then Galloway and Mosby talk about, other studies have shown like long-lasting impacts of starvation and malnutrition, creating, a prevalence of obesity, diabetes, hypertension, so heart problems, stroke, all of these things are interrelated. And then they note here that studies show that the developmental consequences of hunger, not just impacting the survivors, but also prevalent in the adult grandchildren of famine survivors. So it's not just second generation, even the third generation can show the impacts of the grandparents' starvation and malnutrition. So it's got long-lasting consequences, even though, those events happened when the person was a child. So the authors of this article put out a sort of call of action for physicians and people in the medical field to really pay attention to this problem. And they think it's understudied and underacknowledged, that these problems are, elevated risk in Indigenous peoples in Canada arise due in part to what happened to previous generations in residential school systems. And they put out a call that, we have to, acknowledge that this has existed, that this is a widespread problem because of this historical residential school, project of starvation, mass starvation and hunger, neglect. But it's causing actual real problems today with current families and communities. And they also put out a call that we have to demand that there are plentiful, healthy, seasonal, and traditional foods provided to Indigenous children today. What we need to prevent another disaster from happening and help the next generation grow strong and healthy to prevent a lot of these health issues from being passed down over and over again through multiple generations. So we can't change the past, but we can look to the future generation, and make sure the children of today and tomorrow are healthy and taken care of properly. So yeah, that's just this little article. It has an interesting health twist. So if you're interested in more of like the medical or health related topics related to residential schools and Indigenous communities, this is a really interesting one. And it gives us a little bit more information on things maybe we didn't really understand or realize about the long-lasting impacts genetically and biologically in terms of, the food that was given to the children of these schools. So it's an interesting article for those reasons, and I hope you guys get a chance to take a look at it. And